You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja.
We love the herb.
It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokens and tokens and non-token lovers of liberty. It is Tuesday, November 21st, 2017, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Welcome to the program. So glad to have you here. We are back from lots and lots of travel. So my apologies for no show yesterday. I should have been more clear about my schedule because I had to drive back up from Ashland, Oregon yesterday. On Sunday, I took part in the Oregon Marijuana Business Conference, and it was my distinct honor to close the show with an interview of influential State Senator Floyd Przansky, who since 2004 has been one of our leading champions in the Oregon State Senate. A great interview, and I didn't get it recorded. I know, I'm kicking myself. I actually recorded it. It is recorded. But the recording level they sent me from the main board is so low, you can hardly hear anything. So there goes that one, but we'll get another opportunity one of these days. I apologize for not being able to bring that to you. Also came back from Las Vegas, Nevada. I was there for the Thursday and Friday of the 3-day Marijuana Business Conference at the Las Vegas Convention Center. We'll talk a little bit about that in the Cannabis Headline News, and it's also the subject of the Radical Rant today, because comparing those two expos, the MJ BizCon in Las Vegas versus the Oregon Marijuana Business Conference in Ashland, Oregon, just completely opposite ends of the spectrum for both good and bad, and we'll discuss that coming up in the Radical Rant. Also coming up on the show today, we have ACE's patient-focused update. Dr. Jahan Marcu, the Chief Science Officer of Americans for Safe Access, will be joining us to discuss the recent FDA warning letters that went out over the products being sold online, alleging they contain cannabidiol, CBD, but drastically mislabeled. We talked a little bit about that. Plus, we'll get an update on the latest patient-focused certification. And in What in the News today, we're going to talk about one of our headlines, and that is Rob Kampia stepping down as the executive director of the Marijuana Policy Project. He's the only director the organization has ever had. We'll tell you what's going on there and give you my thoughts as to the timing of this announcement. But first, let's get to the Cannabis Headline News.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority Founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at MarijuanaMoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for Tuesday, November 21st, 2017. I'm Russ Belville. Rob Kampia, the executive director of the Marijuana Policy Project, is stepping down from his leadership role. Kampia, who co-founded the organization in 1995, will transition to the new position of Director of Strategic Development. Kampia will continue to serve on the two boards of directors for both MPP and MPP Foundation. The two boards made the decision last week. Matthew Schweik, who joined MPP as the director of state campaigns in early 2015, will serve as interim executive director as the organization searches for a permanent executive director. The boards for MPP and MPP Foundation will begin a national search for a permanent executive director that is expected to last approximately 6 months. During Kampia's tenure, the organization has been at the forefront of legalization in 5 of the 8 legal marijuana states and half of the medical marijuana states. The Kampia took a 3-month leave from the organization in 2010 when Washington City paper published details of predatory sexual harassment allegations against him. The campaign to regulate marijuana like alcohol in Michigan turned in signatures on Monday that it believes will qualify their legalization initiative for the 2018 ballot. The MPP-backed campaign only needed to turn in over 252,000 signatures to qualify, but turned in over 365,000 signatures, thus needing roughly 70% of those signatures to be considered valid by the Secretary of State's office. First, the initiative would be placed before the legislature, which has 40 working days to pass the law or refer it to the voters. The legislature could also refer its own version to the ballot, but political experts believe the most likely scenario is that the legislature will defer to the will of the voters. If passed, people 21 and older could possess up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana and grow up to 12 plants at home. A 10% tax on marijuana would be assessed on top of a 6% state sales tax. Oklahomans will be voting on a statewide initiative for medical marijuana in 2018. The only question now is how soon. Oklahomans for Health, a nonprofit group advocating for medical marijuana, is calling on Oklahoma's Republican Governor Mary Fallin to use her executive power to move the voting for the initiative, State Question 788, from November's general election ballot to the June primary election ballot. Fallin signaled earlier this month that she might move the vote. Some political observers attributed that as a political consideration to keep the issue off the general election ballot to diminish the progressive supporters who'd turn out for the marijuana vote. However, a 2013 poll in Oklahoma showed that even most Republicans support medical marijuana, numbers that are likely to have increased since then. Should the initiative pass, registered patients will be allowed to possess 3 ounces of flower in public, 8 ounces in private, an ounce of concentrates, 4.5 pounds of edibles, and cultivate 6 mature and 6 immature cannabis plants. The Marijuana Business Conference held last weekend in Las Vegas continues to shatter attendance records in the cannabis space. MJ Biz Daily released figures showing that over 18,000 people attended the 3-day event, an increase of 2/3 from last year's show. The conference, which began in 2012 with just 402 attendees, inhabited over 100,000 square feet of the Las Vegas Convention Center. 678 vendors appeared at the event, more than double last year's total. 1 in 9 visitors to the convention hailed from outside of the United States, 3/4 of them Canadian. The conference is now the fastest growing trade show in the country and is outperforming many mainstream expos. The next conference will be held in May 2018 in New Orleans. The founder of cannabis social media giant Massroots is being sued by his former company for allegations of illegal drug use, improper sexual activities, and embezzlement of over $250,000. A civil suit filed in Denver District Court against Isaac Dietrich, who still sits on the board of Massroots, adds context to the firing of Dietrich last month. Quote, Dietrich has been unjustly enriched by paying himself and others amounts in excess of $250,000 without authorization and without company approval, end quote, according to the suit, which refers to those payments as, quote, civil theft of company funds, end quote. Dietrich called the lawsuit, quote, completely unfounded and, quote, frivolous, alleging that the suit is in response to his efforts to have the other 3 board members removed and himself reinstated as CEO. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Tuesday, November 21st, 2017. I'm Russ Belville.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. If you appreciate my full-time dedication to reporting and analyzing the news about cannabis, consider becoming a patron of the show. For just $4.20 per month, you'll help keep my live stream and podcast free while earning yourself your own private ad-free podcast link for the show, as well as links to the supporting articles and data. For a $9.99 VIP subscription, you'll get all that plus my exclusive research, data tables, and graphics. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button today.
The Marijuana Agenda, like the pharmaceutical agenda, without all the side effects, overdose deaths, insurance.
Side effects may include nausea, dry mouth, and constipation. Dry mouth, constipation, indigestion, and abdominal pain,
which can occur without warning and may cause death.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb.com. City of Portland permit number 17-159855.
People should say no to drug use.
It's really, really easy.
Adding more gasoline to the fire.
Lackadaisical. Really tough, really big, really great
to infect and rot our nation from within.
Dangerous gateway drugs.
We don't need to be legalizing marijuana.
To build and grow a stronger, healthier, and drug-free society.
Today in What in the News, we are talking about the the story that happened, about 7 years ago that has become relevant once again in our current discussions of sexual harassment in the workplace. Of course, the most recent allegations, every day is someone new. Today it's Charlie Rose, who has been fired by CBS and PBS for multiple allegations of sexual harassment. And so today, it was really no surprise to see a press release come out from Marijuana Policy Project announcing that their founding executive director, Rob Kampia, was stepping down as executive director and taking a new role with a new position, director of strategic management, I think it was, but basically fundraising role for the organization. Their current state director is now taking over as interim executive director while they search for a new exec. And when I saw this press release come across my desk, I had to think to myself, 2018 iceberg averted. Because those of you who've been following the show for a while or been following the politics of the marijuana activism may recall that back in 2010, there was a shocking revelation in the Washington City paper in an article entitled, "The Breast Massage Will Happen Inside the Culture of Sexual Harassment at the Marijuana Policy Project." Now, this was 2010, so long before all of these most recent allegations, the Weinstein, you could call it the post-Weinstein era, I suppose. But reading this article and going back and covering this article, just shows you that I think what's going on here at MPP is just trying to avoid an obvious PR disaster waiting to happen. Day after day, we keep getting the next allegation, and so forth. This has already been processed and the information's already out there. And with legalization coming in Michigan for 2018 and other high-profile campaigns coming up for the project, they couldn't afford to have this be dragged through the papers again, dragged out into the media, and once again, giving an opportunity for our opponents to paint the marijuana industry as some predatory type of industry. I'm already reviewing some of the Facebook posts on this, people referring to this particular change in leadership, and it's very interesting. A lot of people are responding the same, and interestingly enough, a lot of women in the threads responding. Let's see if I can get to the particular. I love this particular quote. Kat Humphreys posted this one. Quote, "Instead of acknowledging our executive director is a known sexual predator that we've done nothing about for almost a decade since it surfaced, we're shifting him to a less public role so our organization doesn't catch a PR nightmare." End quote. So a lot of people feel that's what's happening now, that MPP is moving Kampia out of the public role, out of the public spotlight to avoid this iceberg, the sexual harassment iceberg that's been coming down the road. And in back channel conversations that I've been having with people throughout the movement, that's been what's been asked. When is this coming up? When is this one coming back up? Why is he still executive director? What's going on? If this is no longer tolerable, what's going on? And some of the highlights from that Washington City paper article had to do with him just basically creating a very hostile work environment, talking about the breast massage will happen. He had a scheduled for girls he was trying to bone. How was the normal conference? I got laid. One of the female employees, he's trying to guess her breast size, says she'd be hotter with a boob job, although he denies that conversation happened. But the main allegation that happened in the Washington City paper post was about him escorting one of his subordinates back to his own home when he judged her to be too drunk to drive, took her back to his house, and they had relations, let's say. And this had been happening at Marijuana Policy Project for years and years and years. Sexually loaded chatter, very hostile type work environment. And it had always been kind of swept under the rug because Rob's such a successful fundraiser for the organization. And his benefactor, the late Peter Lewis, also had these kind of allegations in his background, was also known to be a harasser of sorts. So the response from MPP at the time was to shift him off for 3 months. He took a 3-month leave of absence. He claimed he was going into rehabilitation for hypersexuality, which is the 2010 euphemism, I suppose. And then he was back. You know, this is what a lot of people were having trouble reckoning with as these latest sexual harassment scandals are breaking. Is did he just get off scot-free? 3 months out, and then he's back in charge of the organization, continuing to lead a public role, appearing in the media, and so forth. And given this post-Weinstein era, it seemed quite obvious that this was going to come back out, and there was going to be some reckoning. So shifting Kampia over to this director of strategic relations is MPP's way, I believe, of keeping the good. We get the fundraising, we get the networking, the connections that he's made. We get to keep that. We get to shift the spotlight away and not have to worry about this big sexual harassment iceberg that's coming. Now, the question is whether or not this is something that is going to actually work. As I can see from a lot of the Facebook responses here, a lot of the female activists that I know in my work are kind of calling BS on this. They're kind of saying, nice PR move, but it's not good enough. Someone like this does not need to be within our organizations. And to continue to keep him in the organization on the basis of, well, that's where the money comes from, is kind of another example of the problem that these women have been dealing with all of these years, in that the men of power are allowed to get away with it. So it sets a bad standard, if you ask me, it's almost worse in a sense, trying to avoid the iceberg than to admit that there's this problem and to actually reckon with it. And like I say, the comments I'm seeing, 7 years too late. This is too little too late. Nice PR move. And we're talking about, allegations here that at the end of the night, I'll read you from the Washington City paper piece, just a couple of paragraphs. At an August 6th MPP happy hour at Union Pub on Capitol Hill, Kampia focused his attentions on one female staffer who'd just split with her boyfriend, an MPP co-worker. Quote, "There was no secret that Rob was interested in her sexually the entire time she was working at MPP, even though she was dating an employee," end quote, says former MPPer Dan Bernath, who continues, "Rob's behavior and the single-minded way in which he approached that situation was predatory in every sense of the word. She was days out of a serious long-term relationship. She was vulnerable. Everyone was drinking," end quote, he says. Kampia denies that he had been waiting for the right moment to pounce on the employee. Quote, "I was interested in her for that night," end quote, Kampia says. And at the end of that night, the employee drove away from the bar with Kampia in the passenger seat. In the middle of the ride, Kampia asked to take the wheel, worried that his employee was too drunk to drive. Then he steered her back to his purple Columbia Heights mansion with a rooftop hot tub. What happened at Kampia's home is a matter of competing accounts, but according to Kampia's version of the events, the only one that has been related publicly, the evening concluded with consensual sex between himself and the female subordinate. This episode sent shockwaves through the organization. Within days, the incident had inspired the resignation of 4 staffers, including Bernath, the female subordinate, and her ex-boyfriend. So the problem, of course, in this story is if you believe the woman is too drunk to be driving, she's too drunk to be giving informed consent. Right off the top, that is a problem. And this takes it from the area of harassment into actual assault. And this is why people were so outraged at the time, and it led to the resignation of numerous MPP staffers, as mentioned. Some of the board resigned as well. But again, they were torn at the time by the need to continue raising money versus doing the right thing. Well, now that time has come again, and it's time for this to be reckoned with the right way. One of the big problems we've had in the marijuana movement has been it being an old boys club. And if we continue to let these sorts of sexual predators in the midst, and again, we haven't heard any complaints or issues since those 2010 incidences. Maybe the hypersexuality therapy took hold. We don't know. But again, we haven't heard Some of these high-profile men that are being accused today that are losing their jobs are from accusations that happened years and years ago. They're talking about not seating Roy Moore in Alabama for accusations from the 1980s. So it's time for the marijuana movement to do the right thing. It's time for Rob Kampia to retire, to get out of the marijuana movement. He's done a great job in helping to get a lot of states legalized, but this iceberg ain't going away.
Are you sure this is legal?
I don't know. It's fun though, isn't it?
All right, that sound means that it's 20 after the hour, 4:20 in my home birth time zone of Boise, Idaho. Go Broncos. When we come back, we've got ACE's patient-focused review. Dr. Jahan Marcu. We'll talk about CBD and mislabeled right after this. If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net.
You're not high. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
We've turned the corner on drug addiction in the United States. Drug addiction in the United States is under control.
Okay, maybe you're a little high.
The International Cannabis Business Conference is headed to Hawaii. Get your tickets now for the year's best cannabis industry island retreat this December 1st through 3rd. Kauai Grand Hyatt hosts the 3-day ICBC, which begins with a VIP reception featuring cannabis comedian Doug Benson. The ICBC features exhibitor booths, keynote speeches, and informative panels with industry experts and regulatory officials. Then, when it's all said and done, kick back for the incredible after party with music by reggae legends Morgan Heritage. There's also a singles golf tournament you can play on Monday, sponsored by Leafly Endured Ventures. Log on to internationalcbc.com to get more information and buy your tickets now. Special discount hotel rates are in effect, so act fast. That's internationalcbc.com for the International Cannabis Business Conference. Aloha. Now, in the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Marijuana Agenda presents this anti-drug public service announcement.
This is the life right here, man. They said weed wouldn't lead to harder drugs. They lied. Find out the truth about weed. Drugfreeworld.org.
This has been an actual anti-drug public service announcement. To combat this and other drug war hysteria, listen to the Marijuana Agenda every weekday at 3 p.m. Pacific at live.mjagenda.com. Hi, I'm Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda. If you're a cannabis brand looking to build trust and awareness within the community, consider becoming a sponsor of this program. Your message will be seen and heard by the most dedicated followers of marijuana policy reform, who are loyal and supportive of those brands that give back to the community. Just log on to mjagenda.com and click the Become a Patron button to learn how your brand can also be featured in my live nationwide appearances. Thank you for your support.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Hey everybody, it's Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
Welcome to ACE's patient-focused update. Since California became the first state to restore cannabis as medicine in 1996, almost every U.S. state now recognizes some form of cannabis as medicine. But since 1971, the federal government has steadfastly denied the medical benefits of herbal cannabis. Americans for Safe Access is the nation's leading organization fighting for the rights of all patients who use cannabis as medicine. Join us now for another edition of ACE's Patient-Focused Update.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of ACE's Patient-Focused Update, the podcast for Americans for Safe Access. Learn more at safeaccessnow.org. I'm Russ Belville, and joining us is ACE's Chief Science Officer, Dr. Jahan Marcu. Jahan, welcome back.
Hello. Thank you, Russ.
You know, we are so excited to be able to talk about the developments in medical cannabis. Just last week, we had New York's Governor Mario Cuomo signing a bill that added post-traumatic stress to the list of qualifying conditions. Is that something that's happening pretty much around the medical cannabis states now, or are there still a few that don't recognize that?
It is happening fairly consistently. We're still running into issues where states don't want to have a cannabis program, and they're sending their patients, you know, the parents of sick children have to travel to other states to get those products. So I think this is actually, as from the 10,000-foot view of the U.S., most states are moving towards expanding conditions or getting rid of condition lists altogether. Delaware only covers symptoms, not specific conditions. Washington, D.C. has gotten rid of a condition list. And they're trying this approach that's worked with medicine in the past, where Congress and elected officials don't determine what's a medicine and what its appropriate use is, but the physician and the healthcare providers and the patients and caregivers are involved in that discussion. And so I think that's the general way that the nation will be going with medical cannabis is condition lists were a place to start, but I think the information about cannabis is there's so much of it out there about the therapeutic properties and the risks that I think that those condition lists are going to be something that the next generation of people coming in the industry are just going to hear about as being myths or legends, hopefully.
We hope so. Doesn't it seem strange to have to think of doctors being in charge of the medical practice as something revolutionary? It seems to me that should be the standard, but let's talk a little bit about the patient-focused certification, because this has been a big development for Americans for Safe Access, because there's somewhat of a dearth of understanding when it comes to what's legit and what's not legit. So tell our listeners a little bit about it and what updates you can give us for the upcoming months.
So ACE's patient-focused certification program has continued its busy schedule of trainings and outreach. And since the last recording of this podcast, you know, we've been in Nashville, Tennessee, working with advocates and presenting, actually requested our testimony in front of the state task force on medical cannabis. And the officials there said they're going to look for how to use PFC to help create health and safety regulations and help implement those in their program. So we're going to be back in early 2018 to train regulators, to train stakeholders and patients, a part of a tour that will also include Arkansas and Louisiana. And, and following that, at the end of October, in November 6th, 7th, we had a very successful training in Maryland where we trained dispensary staff as well as what we call verified professionals or managers. And this provides people a chance to get in-depth training on quality control, quality assurance, integrative pest management, not just being able to think through problems and things like that, and understand how a system works to produce high-quality products and keep the workers safe as well as the public. But in the midst of all that, we also had a co-authored article come out in the Journal of the American Medical Association entitled "Labeling Accuracy of Cannabidiol Extracts Sold Online." And this report was done in collaboration with many other researchers. The lead author was Marcel Bonn-Miller from UPenn. We also include Brian Thomas from Research Triangle Institute, as well as Ryan Vandry, who is at Johns Hopkins currently doing inhaled cannabis studies. And we worked on this report. And they reached out to ASA or PFC because they wanted to identify labs that were properly both accredited and certified to do the results. So they knew that if they sent the lab, whatever form the product was in, that the lab had these methods to prepare the sample for analysis, as well as the methods to analyze it properly and all those little things. And so we're pretty surprised a little bit at the results. And if you haven't heard about this study yet, 84 products were purchased online, and 70% of them were more than 10% off in the label values, about 30% under, 30% over. And, these are all, again, purchased online, which probably means that whoever was selling them online was not part of a state-regulated program. And so before people go into into Maryland or Colorado or any other state that has a regulated program with oversight and inspections and throwing out their CBD products, you have to remember that the first thing is that these people are already in violation of the Cole memo. And so they probably might not be following other standards. There's no way of really knowing that, but still some of the products were accurate as well. So I think what this points to is it's a wake-up call for the industry, and part of this research has been just telling, that the industry needs to further work standardizing the products. Some of them are getting it right, and some of them are getting it wrong. And I think that in order to move cannabis products forward, we have to, adopt more quality control, quality assurance procedures, and really tackle this thing seriously. Because I'd like the next round, because this is the third or fourth study of its type to be published. The previous one was done with THC and CBD products. There's 2 of these studies going on in Europe right now. And what I'd love to see is in a year or 2 when they do this secret shopping and testing study again, is that, less than 5% of the products fall outside of an acceptable range of variants or are standardized. And I think that moving forward, we're going to see a lot more companies striving harder to meet this. And again, this came off the tailwind, for better or for worse, right after the FDA sent a lot of letters out to companies for violating basic, claims about their products. So I think this is a great opportunity for businesses to demonstrate that they're not only following the regs, but they're going above and beyond what is expected of them in this environment.
Yes, I'm glad that that information is getting out there, and it shows once again how legalization, regulation, having standards are so important in medicine and what we're doing today. I'd also like to talk to you, Dr. Marcu, about opioids. There's recently a lawmaker in Illinois who proposed a law that said anyone that was battling opioids could get a temporary medical marijuana card immediately. It's kind of an innovative strategy that would be somewhat based on what we've learned, is that access to medical cannabis reduces problems with opioids. But meanwhile, the president's Blue Ribbon Commission on the opioid crisis has pointedly ignored the ability of cannabis to help, and in fact made claims against it, saying it would be worse, invoking some gateway theory even. Give us your reaction to this opioid commission, and tell us what Americans for Safe Access is doing in response.
Well, we're talking about standards for cannabis products, and the same thing applies when it comes to information from government, right? We have this thing called the Information Quality Act, previously known as the Data Quality Act, which allows us to challenge information on government websites that's inaccurate. Now, ASA sued the DEA last year because there were 23 violations in a single document that the DEA was handing out to, elementary and high school teachers, to researchers about the dangers and risks of cannabis, which were based largely on outdated research and their own press releases. And we said, look, this is the information they're using to create policy and influence policy. And that document is no longer on the site. So we know that FOIAs and doing this way are effective. But, the issue you mentioned with getting a cannabis card to be able to reduce the use of opiates is important. Pain is probably one of the most significant public health problems in the U.S. It counts for at least $635 billion annually, which means it breaks down to about $2,000 per person in the U.S., right? That's what the public health costs come out to, which is kind of staggering. And so when we see the ignoring of research by the Trump Opioid Commission, it presented grossly misleading information. And, our director, Steph Shear, has gone on the record saying that, quote, the timing of the only study they cite is suspect, as they did not use the best available science about medical cannabis. The practice of ignoring important clinical research mirrors the data that was ignored in the 90s and early 2000s on cannabis and chronic pain, when opioid prescribing multiplied across healthcare settings and led to the current epidemic of abuse, misuse, and addiction. Now, a lot of people talk about this report that talks about a 2.5 or 2 something increase in opioid use disorder. But even the author, when he was interviewed, Olfson, after the Opioid Commission's report, he even came out and said they left out all the important information from our report. They left out the part that said that the great majority, the significant part of his study, funded by NIDA, was that the great majority of people who use cannabis do not go on to develop an opioid use disorder. There is always a vulnerable population that we have to be aware of and vigilant for. But for the great majority of the population that is dealing with chronic pain, anecdotally, with some clinical research, with epidemiological research, it's all showing that there are potential benefits. And I think that is really difficult to ignore, especially since the commission was formed just months after the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine released the health effects of cannabis and cannabinoids, the current state of evidence and recommendations for research. Now, this was that big 10,000 studied, that they reviewed, and they put out this book, which was an update to the late 1990s IOM report. And the report found, quote, in adults with chronic pain, patients who were treated with cannabis or cannabinoids are more likely to experience a clinically significant reduction in pain symptoms. And, quote, there is substantial evidence that cannabis is an effective treatment for chronic pain in adults. And the commission, what Christie wrote about the 2.5 times greater chance about opioid use disorder is actually not supported by the research that they presented. Their report is also was also co-authored by Bertha Madras, who has recently been removed from UN commissions on drug research. She hasn't been, rarely will anyone else publish international reports with her because she is fiercely anti-cannabis, and so we found out that political people like her were involved. We wanted to know what other researchers have they reached out to. And so part of the FOIA request was to disclose documents and communications. They said they talked to researchers. Really? Who did they talk to? We want to see those emails. Was it just one political figurehead of the anti-medical cannabis agenda? Or was it pros and cons, different people, which were or was it just one research report that they cherry-picked? And so the FOIA by Americans for Safe Access requests any communications about medical cannabis, as well as information or communications that led to the drafting, development, or decision-making process that appeared in the November 1st letter from the President's Commission on Drug Abuse and Opioid Crisis. And what's exciting is that the NIH and ONDCP have 20 federal business days to deliver or ask for an extension or deny this request. And so I think that it would be very in poor taste for them to deny such a simple request, which is what information did you actually use to come about this? And the claims you're making, what were they supported by? And I think that that's, as the public, we have a right to know whether or not the billions of dollars that we're giving for research in this country, whether or not they're actually looking at any of that, of the taxpayers' research that they've been funding through the NIH and NIDA. Think of all those studies over the decades, almost 100 some odd clinical trials with cannabis and cannabis products. Did they look at any of those? Did they look at the dozens of clinical pain studies? Did they even look at one that was published a few years ago on inhaled cannabis to treat diabetic neuropathy? So we'd like to know that what they looked at. So I think in the future, we're going to find out really quickly by the end of the month, maybe in time for Thanksgiving, whether or not they will tell us what information they used to reach this opinion. Because even the author of the report, the one report they cite, does not agree with them, which is interesting. And even in the report they cite, it says, quote unquote, interpret our results with caution, and even hint that they should not be used to make broad policy decisions. So one, it shows me that they probably didn't read anything beyond the headline of the study, but there's a lot more there. So, in short, the opioid crisis draft lacks any mention of the available and sophisticated clinical research data on the safety of cannabis to treat chronic pain. The information it presents is largely focused on a single study that was released months ahead of schedule, which was survey data. They didn't even confirm that these people were actually cannabis users in the study. It was, maybe they were paying people and asking them, hey, if you participate in the study, tell us how much cannabis you use. And, they say surveys are only as strong as their methods. And if you run a survey, it can be a great sort of initial check, on weather conditions, as it were, in public health. But it really doesn't provide any clinical significance to do surveys that don't actually confirm that these people were using any of these substances. And that's one thing you always have to remember about a lot of these surveys is it's just people online filling out a survey. They aren't actually meeting these people, confirming in any way that they've used these products, other than asking them, have you ever used marijuana? They say yes, and it's it can be as broad as that. So again, surveys are great because they're inexpensive and you can try to reproduce them quite inexpensively and quickly. But we should be really cautious of taking any single survey as gospel or as fact. An extremely large amount of work, effort, and information goes into proving even the most trivial facts.
Well put. All right, final bit of information to get out on this edition would be the status of the amendment that's currently protecting the medical cannabis states. This was a can that was kicked down the road back in September. The amendment forbids the Department of Justice from spending any money, taxpayer money, to go after the medical cannabis states. I understand it's up for renewal soon. What is the prognosis?
The prognosis is we don't know. It's surprisingly, I believe, on that date or around that date, is also the deadline for Maryland to be up and running as a medical cannabis program. It's sort of the final licensing announcement for the different phases of licensing they have there. And so, we've been preparing to either let everyone know that they are no longer protected the day after they're up and running on the East Coast and elsewhere, or that that the state laws will be respected. So ACE has been trying to put a ton of resources into making sure that this amendment does pass with the budget, because that's to be voted on every year. And who knows? I mean, maybe we'll see it passed again along with the budget. We'll see. It's an unfortunate kind of. It's going to be close, I think. But we have had good luck with the previous administration. We had some good luck last year, but right now I think it takes pressure on Congress, pressure on your elected officials, and really supporting medical cannabis advocacy, because that is what is making the difference right now on this level. Will they protect patients? Will they protect the caregivers and the intrepid businessmen who provide them with quality products? And so it is my hope and belief that we need this to pass in order to keep the DEA from interfering with legal programs. So if you haven't written an elected official about it, you haven't done your part, you should really do that. And there's no shortage of things you can do. Either help us tackle the opioid crisis, write your elected officials about the CJS amendment to defund the DEA's activity, the Department of Justice activity against legally operating businesses, and the patients as well. So, if you're not doing something and you're not a little scared, you're not paying attention.
Absolutely. Check out safeaccessnow.org, the website for Americans for Safe Access, where you can find more information on the amendment and how you can get involved. Dr. Jahan Marcu is the Chief Science Officer for Americans for Safe Access, and we'll talk to you again soon on another edition of the Patient Focus Update. Thanks, Jahan.
Thank you.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is brought to you by Cannabis Kamikaze, a professional licensed producer from Canada producing 3 pounds per light. Follow Cannabis Kamikaze on Twitter at Cannabis Kamikaze. That's at Cannabis, Kamikaze. Cannabis Kamikaze.
The Marijuana Agenda, like the alcohol agenda. A lot safer.
This is Cannabis Facts from Robert Platshorn's thesilvertour.org, supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., poised to lead America's hemp revolution at hempinc.com. In 1937, the second most prescribed medicine, marijuana, was banned. It wasn't about marijuana. The paper, oil, and chemical industries lobbied to end hemp farming. No longer labor-intensive, an acre of hemp produced more quality paper than 4 acres of trees. Plastics and fibers could be produced from a plant. Hemp can even produce 10 times the energy of today's ethanol. As marijuana prohibition ends, many states now allow farmers to again grow hemp. This was Cannabis Facts from thesilvertour.org, an educational nonprofit supported by our donors and Hemp Inc., a public company poised to process America's hemp crop at hempinc.com.
Health Cannabinoid, your ACMPR experts. Consultation services for medical cannabis. Visit healthcannabinoid.com or call 1-800-906-1383. That's www.healthcannabinoid.com or call 1-800-906-1383. Health Cannabinoid.
Total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I am ill.
That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
People don't smoke marijuana.
It's been an interesting last few days here as I've been traveling across the country, and I've been to both Las Vegas and Ashland, Oregon. And the difference between the two events that I just recently covered couldn't be more stark. It's quite amazing, really. And it kind of, to me, symbolized where we're at as a industry, as a movement right now, and what we're looking at, especially now that we've got the legalization of California, and it looks like 2018 Michigan will get on board. That's just another huge state to add to the list. And to me, it reminds me of, well, the Las Vegas thing. I mentioned it in the Cannabis Headline News, how it's 18,000 people went to this event. 18,000 people. And it was 100,000 square feet of expo space. And it literally took 45 minutes to walk the entire expo. 45 minutes to make your way through the entire floor. 678 different vendors. They, in their story, in their press release, they mentioned that if you spent 5 minutes talking to each vendor, just each booth, 5 minutes at each booth, would have taken you 57 hours. So there's literally not enough time in the expo. Like Friday was 11 to 6. Like I think the Wednesday was 11 to 7. Thursday was 11 to 6, and Friday was 11 to 4. So what do you got there? 8 hours, 7 to 15 hours, 19 hours. 57 hours is what it would have taken to speak to every vendor at the event. So it's just a huge, huge event. Meanwhile, or not meanwhile, but the next event I went to on Sunday was the Oregon Marijuana Business Conference in Ashland. And there were, 20 vendors there, 20 people with exhibits. And it was much more focused on the Oregon medical program, on activism, on what's happening with licensing and taxes, how to protect small businesses. And the field couldn't have been any more different. And I'm not saying necessarily good or bad. I'm saying what I'm comfortable with. It reminded me a bit of the club scene in a sense. Like Vegas was like going to one of those big clubs, and there's hundreds of sweaty people all on the dance floor trying to hook up and be cool and who likes who and a little bit drunk, right? There's that and loud pounding music and everything's flashing. Whereas Ashland and Oregon Marijuana Business Conference is more like a nice, house party, a nice warm house party where there's friends and people know each other and there aren't necessarily ulterior motives going on, but maybe there could be a hookup here or there, but much more friendly and open and loving. And that's kind of the crossroads we're at here with the marijuana movement and with marijuana industry. And I think it's important to distinguish between those two things. The marijuana industry is the buying and selling of a commodity. And, it's capitalism with all its warts and all its good attributes as well. Capitalism's done a lot to move the ball as far as getting marijuana legalized. The enticement of tax revenue to the states and new job creation to the people has done a lot to move the ball forward where simple compassion and justice didn't get the job done. But there's a marijuana movement as well. And where the marijuana industry is marijuana as a commodity, the marijuana movement is marijuana as people, is the people who use cannabis, whether it's medicinal, religious, or just to pass the time on a Friday night. But we are a people. We are a people bound together initially by this prohibition. We were forced to be outlaws, forced to commune with one another, forced into smoking circles with a whole variety of people. And I think that's been a good thing for our people. I think that's exposed. I find in stoner culture a much more tolerant, accepting group of people because they've been around lots of different people. Because when you're in, southern Missouri or in, southwestern Idaho like I was, or someplace, where prohibition is hell, you had to bind together with whichever stoner you could find. It didn't matter if they were black or liberal or gay or what. It didn't matter. You were bound together by that prohibition. And you'd be passing the joint in a smoke circle, all sorts of different kind of people. But that's going to change. And what will our cannabis culture, cannabis community be if we're no longer bound together by that prohibition? To some extent, there'll be the connoisseur culture, right? Like there's wine snobs, there'll be pot snobs, there'll be people who want this particular strain and this particular thing, and they'll go on and wax nostalgic about it. But beyond that, there's many people who aren't really that way. I'm not really that way for the most part. I'm from Idaho. We had 2 strains, got some and don't. You got some? Great, let's try it. So what binds us together? And will our community become less tolerant and more capitalistic and more greed-driven than compassion-driven? That's a crossroads we're at. And while Las Vegas was exciting and flashy and amazing, going to the after parties there felt sterile and unappealing to me. lots and lots of people, gotta admit, a lot of people networking, but just didn't feel friendly. And perhaps this is just a part of it, the sheer size and spectacle of the Las Vegas thing versus the small, confined, small club atmosphere of a gig like Ashland. But I think there's also a difference in regional, in the community, a regional difference. The Northern California, Southern Oregon vibe, that whole grower, farmer, back to the land type of community vibe versus Vegas, which is obviously, Sin City and capitalism and decadence and concrete and steel and glass. Obviously, there's that difference at work as well. I don't know how much of this we can control. I think there's a certain inevitability to the Vegas model encroaching on what we call our cannabis community. Certainly inevitable. As prohibition falls and access opens up and more people become involved with it, certainly more money is going to come in. How much of that community we can keep is up to us. How much of the industry we can keep, I don't think there's a whole lot we have available to us. I think we as activists can fight for micro business models. I think we should fight more for small, personal, like sole proprietor, vertically integrated models. Basically, legalize what we're doing now. All my life, when I was getting weed, I was getting it from a guy. You've had the guy. A lot of you out there listening to me, you know the guy, the reefer man. Cab Calloway sang about it, 80 years ago. The reefer man. Legalize him. Legalize the guy who grows a few plants and sells them to friends. That's what has been missing, and states are attempting it. California's looking at a way to do it. Oregon's trying to build better mechanisms for this. It's got to happen. I think that's one of the ways that we protect ourselves and keep our community the way we've wanted to. But there will be a certain amount of commoditization of cannabis. It's inevitable. That's the way American capitalism works. How much we keep is up to us culturally, though. Let's commit to being the kind of cannabis culture that still passes that joint circle in a very diverse group of people. Let's still be the kind of people who have good friends who are ideologically very oppositional in many ways. I mean, some of my favorite friends, best friends in activism, are California gun grabbers, hippie liberal types, and Texas open carry conservatives. I count both. I apologize for gun grabber. You know what I mean. I'm just joking. I have deeply religious Christian followers and friends and colleagues. And I have, radical atheists who, like myself, that get together and have a completely different view. We have people from all walks and all groups in this. And I think of what we bring to this growing industry is that social conscience, is that we want to make sure that we don't forget about the medical patients. We want to make sure we don't forget about the pot POWs. We want to make sure there's some sort of restorative justice for people who've been wronged by this war on marijuana all these years that disproportionately fell to the poor, to the people of color, to the disadvantaged. We can continue to be that conscience for this industry and for this movement. I hope that we all step up and of our industry leaders and our movement leaders demand the highest levels of integrity and an end to some of the harassments and the improprieties that we've had to tell many times on this show, the stories we've had to tell. I'm hopeful that we can keep a lot of Ashland in this evolving market, in this evolving industry. I'm hoping we can keep that. How much we can keep is pretty much our doing. Let's see what we can do about that. That sound means that's all the time we got for today. But thanks for joining us here on the Marijuana Agenda. We're here every weekday, except this week being Thanksgiving week. I'll do a show tomorrow, and then we're going to take the Thanksgiving holiday off. My folks are driving in from Idaho. I don't have to go be a criminal for Thanksgiving. How nice. Take care of each other, tokers.
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down.